think there's both a human dimension and a divine dimension to this. That what's held in common is the temptation that any of us have to try to put another person in a box. We try to label other people in ways we don't want to be labeled ourselves, because then you can dismiss people in that way. And the mystery of another person always transcends any one description. If you think about any relationship, we have lots of different terms that we use to describe those relationships. And there may be ones that predominate, but they never define. The essence of idolatry is when we try to define something else or someone else to put them into a box and to label in that sort of way. And so that's a danger that we have in human relationships that defies the mystery of another person. In relation to Jesus, it becomes even more important because the divinity that Jesus comes with as fully God and fully human is one that's inexhaustible. So the mystery that we are to each other as human beings, I've been married to my wife now, this October it'll be 37 years. And yet, even though I know her intimately well, she also continues to be a mystery to me and I to her. And that's part of the depth of a relationship and the depth of love. And that's even more so in our relationship with God. The so-called dark nights of the soul of the great mystics, that's actually an achievement. And it's the dark nights of the soul is not because you're a superficial prayer. That's just trivial. The dark night of the soul is the more intimate you become with God, the more of a mystery God becomes. Because the closer you get to God, the more you become aware you're not God. And so the dark night of the soul happens out of intimacy. And part of what I think, even at the beginning of this story of Jesus' ministry in John's gospel, he's not wanting to allow other people to turn him into an idol and to box him in and to label him. That's a dangerous way of relating, even on the human level, even more so when you take into account Jesus' divinity as well. I love the invitation because it's an invitation to a relationship and a journey. Similar to what happens with Abraham, it's a kind of come into this relationship and you're going to discover a wonderful life, and it's going to surprise you with great regularity. And I can't give you a prediction because if I did that, it would undersell what you're going to experience. I used to, we're sitting in Goodson Chapel. It's named in memory of a now deceased United Methodist bishop who was very influential in my wife's and my life. And he had an extraordinary ministry in Alabama and Virginia and North Carolina. And I remember talking to him one day and I said, Bishop Goodson, when were you called into ministry? And he said, most recently this morning. And I just thought, oh, I want to remember that. Because there's a sense with Come and See which just says, when you get married, it's really one of the craziest decisions and set of vows you could ever imagine. Because you're committing to a life that you have absolutely no idea what's really going to unfold. My wife and I, when we were engaged, had all sorts of anxieties about what our life was going to be like. So we worked out a 10-year plan, for the first 10 years. And we were really clear about everything. Within about 2 months after our wedding day, it was completely useless. And we just said, hey, let's just enjoy the ride. And, we've had lots of twists and turns and surprises along the way. And yet we look back and, when did I take my wedding vows? Most recently this morning. It's that kind of journey. And that's what Jesus is inviting the disciples into is a come and see. And part of what I love about that phrase, come and see, is it's relational, the come, and it's about that perception of beauty. See, behold. There's a sense of recognizing something that's going to have much greater depth than you could ever imagine. I mean, do you really think you know what it means to love and to cherish when you're just getting married? No, because it's at a superficial level. It's when the going gets tough that you begin to see the depth of what you've committed to. And it's those sorts of things that the behold is about, that this journey with Jesus is going to take you in surprising places, and you're going to discover abundant life in the process. Part of this is, how do you get fresh eyes to see? Whether you're a new Christian for the first time, maybe even just a seeker, just trying to explore, and you've got very little understanding of any of this. Or whether you're, like me, so steeped in it that you've become blinded to stuff because you take it for granted. So how do you develop those fresh eyes and those stories? One of the more sobering times was when I was in an adult Sunday school class, and I was doing a series they'd asked me to do on theological perspectives on the beginning and ending of life. They really wanted to look at euthanasia, abortion, these sorts of questions from a Christian perspective. But I thought, well, we ought to be sure we're going to think about this theologically. So I just began the session with this well-educated adult Sunday school group by saying, I saw on a side of a truck the letters G-O-D. And I'm curious, because I'm a Martian, I just hopped down, I hear people praying to this G-O-D, I see it on the side of a truck. What do you mean by God? And, the truck's actually for guaranteed overnight delivery. But when you see these letters, G-O-D, what do they mean to you? There was just silence. And then I said, okay, how would you describe this God? Then somebody raised their hand and said, well, God's a force that's created things. I thought, okay, let's work with that. God's a force that's created things. Some things, all things. Well, didn't want to sound too totalitarian, so I said some things. I said, okay, we got God as a force that's created some things. And I'm thinking, how you want to revise that? No, everybody seemed pretty content. So then I said, let's pray. Everybody, they're in church, so they bow their head, and I said, oh, force that's created some things. And everybody kind of raised their eyebrows like, something's wrong here, folks. And I realized that we didn't have fresh ways of talking about God or Christ, that we just kind of taken it for granted. My wife preached a series of sermons once on the Lord's Prayer in her congregation, and people were coming out who were lifelong members going, I don't know, I don't think I want to pray that. I'm like, well, okay, at least you're being honest now. You've been doing it probably every week for 50 years. It's probably good to reflect on what it is you're praying. So I think the come and see in our time is not to take so many things for granted, to actually look with fresh eyes and say, what does it mean to say, give us this day our daily bread? What does it mean to say, thy kingdom come, not my kingdom come? And to really wrestle with that in the prayer or in the Apostles' Creed, and to see with fresh eyes. This gets back to the image of being surprised and saying, where's the presence and power of God at work? Well, do you believe God actually is at work in the world? There's a wonderful image of the village of Le Chambon that rescued a lot of Jews from the Nazis in World War II in Vichy occupied France. And one of the things that they said was it was a culture that created a conspiracy of goodness. And I thought, oh, that's great. If you think about the mafia as a conspiracy that produces evil, can you imagine a community or a culture where everybody's just inspiring each other to do something else good? And it's that level of intentionality that's just really beautiful. I saw a story on CBS Sunday Morning a couple weeks ago. I think you can find it online, about a project in Shreveport, Louisiana called Community Renewal International. It was founded by a pastor. And and they have signs that just say, we care. And he just rooted it in helping people in a neighborhood learn to know each other and love each other. And they've worked in some really rough neighborhoods, and they've worked in some wealthy neighborhoods. And one of the things that he says is, just try it. And you see this kind of love spilling over into others. And I kept thinking of that phrase, a conspiracy of goodness. And that's what I think a community can do. And that's the come and see. People are intrigued, when they hear good stuff is happening here. You can find life there. Oh, let me show up. I was talking to a guy once in South Africa, and the pastor had told me to go over and talk to him. And so I went over and I said, tell me about yourself. He said, I'm just an investment banker from Johannesburg. I don't know what I'm doing here. And I said, well, how'd you become a participant? He said, things were a mess in my life. And I saw that there were interesting things happening here, so I just started coming. I just kept coming. And I don't know why. I'm just an investment banker from Johannesburg. I realized this was like a liturgical refrain that, he'd say some things and then he'd say, I'm just an investment banker from Johannesburg. And I went back to the pastor. I said, why did you want me to talk to him? He said, well, he's had a tremendous influence in helping a number of people in this community discover Christ. I said, he's the last one to be aware of that. And the pastor said, I know, isn't it wonderful? And it was that sense of, people just getting swept up in a life where they're not even fully sure of what they're doing, but they're discovering relationship, they're discovering ways to change people's lives, to help cultivate goodness, justice, mercy, forgiveness, all the signs of God's reign.